They laughed at him every day. They called him a poor conductor. Some refused to even greet him. But none of them knew that the man collecting bus fares was the billionaire owner of the entire transport company. And when the truth finally came out, an entire village wished they could take back every cruel word they had ever said. But before Ethan Carter became the poor conductor everyone mocked, he was a billionaire living in a luxury penthouse, surrounded by wealth, success, and a painful loneliness that money could never fix. The night Ethan Carter sat alone in his big empty penthouse and cried was the night everything in his life changed. Not because he had lost money. He had so much money that even if he spent every single day buying things, he would never finish it. Not because his business was failing. His transport company was growing bigger every year. No. Ethan cried that night because of a text message. A simple text message that was never meant for his eyes. His girlfriend of 8 months, a woman named Diana, had accidentally sent him a voice note transcript that was meant for her best friend. Ethan read it slowly. Then he read it again. The word said, "Honestly, he is so boring. But that penthouse is everything, girl. I am staying until I get that ring. Then we will see." Ethan put his phone down on the table. He walked to the window. He stood there for a very long time, looking at the city lights below him, and he felt something break quietly inside his chest. He was 32 years old. He was rich. He was handsome. And he was completely, painfully alone. This was not the first time. Before Diana, there was Michelle. Michelle used to hold his hand at restaurants and look at him with soft eyes like he was the most wonderful man alive. But the moment Ethan mentioned possibly moving his main office to another city, Michelle disappeared. She stopped returning calls. She sent one final message that said she needed space. Before Michelle, there was Priya. Priya called him her soulmate. She cried at his mother's birthday dinner and said she had never felt so welcome in a family. Then she borrowed $200,000 for her sick mother and vanished completely. The sick mother turned out to be perfectly healthy. Priya was at a beach resort with another man. Before Priya, there was Clara. Clara was the worst because Clara seemed genuinely good. She laughed at his stupid jokes. She called him at random hours just to hear his voice. Then his accountant mentioned that one of his smaller companies was being sold and his visible net worth would temporarily drop. Clara called off the relationship within a week. She said they were not compatible. Ethan never told anyone how long he cried after that. He simply got up, put on his suit, and went back to work. That was what he always did. But this time felt different. This time, sitting in that silent penthouse with the city glittering below him like it did not care about his pain, Ethan felt something shift inside him. He was tired of performing. He was tired of being Ethan Carter the billionaire. He was tired of wondering every time a woman smiled at him whether she was smiling at him or at his bank account. A thought came to him slowly, like a small candle being lit in a dark room. What if he disappeared for a while? Not forever. Just long enough to find out if real kindness still existed somewhere in the world. What if he took off the expensive suit and the gold watch and the luxury car and became just a regular man? An ordinary man with an ordinary job, living in a place where nobody knew his name or his money. What if he looked for love the way poor men search for it, with nothing to offer except himself? He called his mother at midnight. Victoria Carter was 61 years old and she had raised Ethan by herself after his father died when Ethan was only 9 years old. She was wise and warm and she always knew when something was truly wrong with her son. She picked up on the second ring. "Ethan," she said. Just his name. The way she said it made his throat tight. "Mama," he said. "I need to talk to you." And he told her everything. About Diana. About all the women before Diana. About the idea forming in his mind. About disappearing. About disguising himself as a poor man and starting over somewhere nobody knew him. His mother was quiet for a long time after he finished. Then she said very softly, "My son. How long have you been carrying all of this alone?" Ethan did not answer. He did not need to. Victoria already knew. And when she finally said, "Tell me the plan," Ethan felt, for the first time in a very long time, that he was not completely alone in the world. Neither of them knew yet that this plan was going to lead them both to a small dusty village, and to a young woman whose simple kindness was about to change everything. Before we begin, if you love emotional stories filled with powerful life lessons, shocking twists, and unforgettable endings, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. We share stories that touch the heart and remind us that kindness always matters. Now, let's begin. Thornfield was the kind of village that nobody ever talked about unless they were given directions. It sat quietly between two bigger towns, connected by a road that turned orange with dust in the dry season and swallowed car tires in the rainy one. It had one market, one church, one primary school, one borehole that the whole community shared, and more gossip than any city 10 times its size. The people of Thornfield knew everything about each other. They knew who was fighting with their neighbor. They knew whose son had failed his exams. They knew who had received money from a relative abroad and was now behaving like royalty. Thornfield was small and loud and warm and difficult, the way real places always are. And it was into this village that Ethan Carter arrived one quiet Thursday morning, carrying a single small bag, wearing a faded blue shirt, plain dark trousers, and a pair of old brown shoes that his personal assistant had found at a second-hand market. Ethan had spent 3 weeks preparing everything carefully. The people at his company believed he was resting at a private health resort somewhere. His most trusted manager held authority to handle emergency decisions. His lawyers knew only that he would be unreachable for some time. His mother was the only person on earth who knew the truth. He had chosen Thornfield because one of his own bosses, the Route 7 line running between Thornfield and the larger town of Crestdale, passed through the village twice every day. The regular conductor on that route had been quietly transferred to another line. Under the name Eddie Cole, with simple paper documents his team had prepared, Ethan had taken the conductor position himself. He had rented a small room in the home of an old man named Mr. Ode, who lived alone, minded his own business completely, and charged very little for a clean room and a shared outdoor kitchen. Everything was arranged. Everything was ready. Ethan told himself he was prepared. He was not prepared. Nothing he had read or planned had prepared him for how it actually felt to be ignored, mocked, and looked through by people who had decided, within seconds of seeing him, that he was worth nothing. On his very first afternoon in Thornfield, he walked to the market to buy a few things for his room. A woman selling tomatoes looked at his worn shoes and turned to her friend and whispered something. Both women laughed. At the bus stop the next morning, a group of young men saw him holding his conductor's ticket book and one of them called out, "Ha! Big man job," and the others laughed loudly. An older man in a pressed shirt looked him up and down at the borehole and simply walked past without greeting him, even though Ethan had said good morning clearly. Ethan kept his face calm. He kept saying good morning to people. He kept smiling. But inside, something quiet was accumulating, a slow, heavy understanding of what it felt like to be invisible. To be dismissed. To be treated as less than human simply because of what you wore and where you walked. Then on his third day, something happened that he did not expect. He was at the bus stop at 6 in the morning, arranging his ticket book, when a girl came running down the road. She was young, maybe early 20s, wearing a simple yellow dress that had been washed so many times it had faded almost to white. She had a basket on one arm and she was clearly in a hurry. She nearly ran straight into him and stumbled. Ethan caught her arm so she would not fall. She looked up at him, breathless. "Sorry," she said immediately. "I am so sorry. I was not looking." She steadied herself, checked that her basket had not dropped anything, and then looked at him properly for the first time. Most people, when they looked at Ethan in his conductor clothes, looked away again almost immediately. This girl did not look away. She looked at him the way you look at a real person. "Are you okay?" she asked him. "I nearly knocked you down." Ethan almost laughed. She had nearly fallen. He had caught her. And she was asking if he was okay. "I am fine," he said. "Go carefully." She gave him a small, genuine smile and ran on down the road. He watched her go. He did not know her name yet. He did not know anything about her. But something about that 30-second exchange stayed with him for the rest of the day in a way he could not explain. Amora woke up every morning at 5 o'clock. Not because she wanted to. Because if she did not, Mrs. Hartwell would bang on her door at 5:15 and call her lazy in a voice loud enough for the whole house to hear. Amara was 24 years old. She was thin from not always eating enough and quiet from years of learning that speaking up only made things worse. She had her mother's eyes, large and dark and full of something that the hard life around her had not yet managed to extinguish. Her mother had died when Amara was 11. Her father had followed 2 years later, leaving her with a stepmother who had married him for security and who viewed Amora as an unfortunate item that had come with the house. Mrs. Gloria Hartwell was not a monster in the way that movie villains are monsters. She was something more ordinary and more dangerous, a selfish woman who had simply decided, long ago, that Amora's comfort did not matter. And because nobody stopped her, she had gone on deciding this every day for 13 years. Vanessa was Mrs. Hartwell's daughter from her first marriage, and Vanessa had learned everything from watching her mother. She had learned that Amara was there to serve. She had learned that Amora's feelings were not important. She had learned that beauty and attitude could get you far in life, and she practiced both every single day with great dedication. Vanessa was 25, tall, and genuinely beautiful in a sharp, cold way. She had a way of looking at people that made them feel small. She spoke to Amora the way some people speak to a dog they do not particularly like, not with cruelty every minute, but with a casual dismissal that was somehow worse. Amora, my dress is not ironed. Not please. Not thank you. Just the statement, like an instruction given to a machine. And Amara would go and iron the dress because the alternative was a long lecture from Mrs. Hartwell about ungrateful children and the generosity of people who had taken her in when she had nothing. Amora cooked every meal in that house. She cleaned every room. She fetched water from the communal tap 3 streets away every morning because Mrs. Hartwell said the tap in their yard had poor pressure, though everyone suspected she simply enjoyed watching Amora carry the heavy jerrycans. Amara washed clothes by hand, tended the small vegetable garden behind the house, ran errands to the market, and managed the household shopping list on a budget that Mrs. Hartwell kept deliberately tight so that Amara would have no money left over for herself. In the evenings, when Vanessa was watching videos on her phone and Mrs. Hartwell was resting, Amora would sit in her small room at the back of the house and write in her notebook. She wrote down ideas. Small, careful, practical ideas about starting a little food business. How much pepper soup cost to make? How much profit a small pot could bring? How many pots a week she would need to sell to afford rent for 1 room? She had been writing in that notebook for 2 years. She did not tell anyone about it because she had learned a long time ago that hope, in that house, was something you kept hidden. It was on a Tuesday morning that Amora first really spoke to the new conductor everyone in Thornfield was already talking about. She had been at the market since early morning, buying things for the house, and she was hurrying back because Mrs. Hartwell had told her to return before 8 or face a long and unpleasant explanation of what responsibility meant. She turned the corner near the bus stop too quickly and nearly walked straight into the man in the faded blue shirt. He caught her before she fell. She looked up and recognized him. She had seen him at the stop before, the new conductor named Eddie, and the first thing she noticed was that he did not look annoyed. Most people, when someone nearly collides with them, look at least a little irritated. This man just looked concerned. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Nothing spilled." She checked her basket quickly and shook her head. "I am fine. I am sorry. I was rushing." He smiled a small, quiet smile. "No harm," he said. "Go carefully." It was such a simple thing to say. Such an ordinary thing. But Amara had not heard someone speak to her with that kind of simple warmth in so long that she carried those 2 words, "go carefully," all the way home without knowing why. Word travels fast in a small village. By the end of Ethan's first week as conductor on the Route 7 bus, everyone in Thornfield had an opinion about him. Mrs. Bridget, who sold fabric near the market entrance and considered herself the official news broadcaster of the village, had already shared her assessment with approximately 40 people. "That Eddie," she said, pressing her lips together in a way that suggested she had thought deeply about this. "Something is not right about him. A man that age, that size, working as conductor. He must have done something wrong somewhere. Maybe he was fired from a real job. Maybe he has a bad history." Her friend Agnes nodded seriously. "He is too quiet," Agnes agreed. "Quiet people always have something to hide." Neither woman had spoken to Ethan for more than 30 seconds. But in Thornfield, 30 seconds was more than enough time to build a complete biography of a person. The women who were interested in finding a husband had assessed Ethan quickly and moved on. There was Tina, who worked at the small provision store near the church and who had initially thought the new conductor was handsome, because he was, even in cheap clothes, undeniably good-looking. But Tina had standards. Specifically, Tina had a list. The list included a car, a smartphone that was less than 2 years old, a job that required a tie, and parents who owned at least a small plot of land somewhere. Ethan, with his worn shoes and his ticket book and his small rented room at Mr. Aid's house, did not come close to the list. Tina mentioned this to her friend Rachel. Rachel mentioned it to 3 other people. Within 2 days, it was accepted village knowledge that the new conductor was a poor man with no prospects and no future, and women who valued their time were advised not to waste it. Vanessa's opinion was the loudest, because Vanessa's opinions were always the loudest. She rode the Route 7 bus on Wednesdays and Fridays to visit her friend who lived in the next town, and from her very first ride with Ethan as conductor, she made her feelings completely clear. The first Wednesday, she handed him her fare with her fingers spread wide so that the coins dropped rather than being placed in his hand, and she said, "Make sure you call my stop clearly." Last conductor used to mumble. The following Friday, she arrived at the stop wearing a new dress and speaking loudly on her phone, walked past 3 waiting passengers to board first, and then complained to Ethan that the seat near the window had a small smudge on it. "Is this how you people maintain these buses?" she said. She did not say it quietly. She said it the way people say things when they want an audience. 2 other passengers looked at their shoes uncomfortably. Ethan wiped the seat with his cloth and said, "Sorry about that, ma'am." Vanessa sat down without another word, satisfied. She had no idea, not even a small suspicion, that the man wiping the seat owned the bus she was sitting on, and every other bus on every other route in the region. What Vanessa also did not know was that Ethan was watching. Not with anger. Not yet. But with the quiet, careful attention of a man who is learning something important. He watched how Vanessa spoke to people when she thought nobody of consequence was looking. He watched how Mrs. Bridget's voice changed when she was talking to the pastor versus when she was talking to the vegetable sellers. He watched who greeted the old blind man at the corner of the market and who walked past him without a glance. He kept a small mental record of every interaction, every moment of cruelty, every moment of genuine decency. And in all of this watching, in all of these long days on the noisy Route 7 bus, one name kept appearing in his mental record on the decent side. Amara. Always Amara. The girl who gave the old blind man directions without being asked. The girl who helped a mother lift her baby onto the bus while everyone else waited impatiently. The girl whose kindness was so ordinary and so consistent that it was clearly not performance, it was simply who she was. Ethan did not understand yet why this mattered so much to him. But it did. Victoria Carter arrived in Thornfield on a quiet Saturday morning, and nobody looked at her twice. That was the point. She had dressed carefully, an old cotton wrapper skirt in a faded pattern, a plain blouse with a small tear near the collar that she had made herself with a seam ripper, worn flat sandals, a simple headscarf, and no jewelry except her wedding ring which she removed and left at the hotel in the next town where she was actually staying. She carried a small bag and walked with a slight stoop that was only partly acted. Her back had genuinely been troubling her lately and she refused to admit it to her doctor. She had told Ethan she was coming. He had protested. She had listened to his protest very patiently and then done exactly what she planned to do anyway, which was a thing she had been doing since he was 9 years old and thought he knew better than her about everything. Victoria had a specific reason for coming that she had not entirely shared with Ethan. Yes, she wanted to see the village. Yes, she wanted to see how people behaved. But more than anything, she wanted to see this girl. This Amara that her son had mentioned 3 times in his last phone call without seeming to realize he was doing it. Ethan had called to update her on his observations. He had talked about the village gossip and about Vanessa's behavior on the bus and about the different women who had tried to attract his attention once they noticed he was young and relatively good-looking, even in poor clothes. And then, almost as an afterthought each time, he had mentioned Amara. "There is a girl here, Mama, who helped an old woman carry her bag up the road and refused to take money for it. And later, that same girl, Amora, she shared her lunch today with the bus driver when she saw he had forgotten his food at home. She did not know I was watching. And later still, she smiles at the old blind man at the corner every single day. Not a polite smile. A real one. Victoria had listened to all of this and said nothing. But she had started packing her bag that same evening. She spent her first morning simply walking. She walked through the market slowly, like an old woman with nowhere to be. She stopped at a stall and asked about prices. The young man running the stall looked at her old clothes and quoted her a price she could tell was higher than what he charged other people. She paid it without complaint and moved on. She sat on the bench near the borehole and rested her feet and watched people pass. Two young women walked by laughing and nearly stepped on her bag. They glanced at her and kept walking. A man on a bicycle almost hit her and rode on without stopping to check if she was all right. Victoria watched all of this with calm, careful eyes. She was not surprised. She had known for a long time how the world treated people it considered unimportant. What she was here to find out was whether anyone in this village was different. She had been sitting near the borehole for about 20 minutes when a young woman in a faded yellow dress came to fill a jerrycan. Victoria watched her work the pump handle. It was stiff and required real effort. When the jerrycan was full, the young woman straightened up and then noticed Victoria sitting there. "Good morning, Ma," she said. Most people in the village had not greeted Victoria at all. "Good morning, my daughter," Victoria said. The young woman looked at her more carefully. "Are you all right, Ma? You look tired. Have you walked far?" Victoria said she had walked a little and her feet were troubling her. Without another word, the young woman set down her jerrycan, went back to the borehole, and brought back a small cup of clean water. "Drink first," she said, holding it out. "Then I will find you somewhere better to sit." Victoria took the water. Her hand, as she reached out, was not entirely steady. Because in all the calculations and plans and preparations she had made for this trip, she had not calculated for the possibility that the very first person to show her kindness in Thornfield would be exactly the girl she had come to find. If you're enjoying this story so far, take a second to subscribe and like this video. It helps us create more powerful stories like this one. And trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next, because Ethan's secret is about to change everything. Ethan did not plan to help Amora. The first time it happened, it was simply a reaction, the kind of thing a decent person does without thinking. He had been walking back from the bus depot one evening when he heard raised voices coming from the direction of the Hartwell house. He slowed down. In Thornfield, raised voices near a house usually meant a family argument that was nobody else's business. But then he heard one voice clearly, sharp and cold and satisfied with itself, saying, "Your little market idea was rejected. Nobody wants your community catering nonsense. Stop dreaming and focus on what you are actually good for." Then a door slammed. Ethan stood very still on the road. He did not need to see who was speaking. He knew the voice. He had been listening to it on his bus twice a week for 3 weeks. He found out the details the next morning from Mr. Ode, his landlord, who knew everything that happened in Thornfield and shared it freely with whoever sat near him long enough. Amara, it turned out, had applied to a small community development program that gave modest grants to young people starting local businesses. She had submitted a proposal for a pepper soup and local food catering business. The program coordinator, a man named Mr. Fashola who ran a small office from the community hall, had apparently told her the proposal was promising but needed more work on the budget breakdown. This was not a rejection. This was an invitation to revise and resubmit. But Vanessa had somehow found the coordinator's letter, read it, and reframed it to Amora as a complete and humiliating failure. Ethan listened to all of this from Mr. Ode, who told the story with the cheerful cruelty of someone who found other people's troubles interesting. Ethan thanked him for the tea and went to his room and sat on his bed for a while. He could not tell Amara that Vanessa had lied to her. That would require explaining how he knew, which would raise questions he could not yet answer. But he could do something else. He had a laptop in his room that the village assumed was for watching films. In reality, it was how he quietly managed the parts of his business that could not wait. He opened it that evening and spent 2 hours rewriting Amora's business proposal, not from scratch, because he did not have her original document, but from everything Mr. Ode had described of it. He wrote a clear, practical, properly structured budget breakdown for a small catering business in a rural community. He printed it at the small business center in the next town during his day off. Then he folded it, put it in a plain envelope, and the following morning he quietly slipped it under the door of Mr. Fashola's office with a note that said only, "This was submitted on behalf of a young woman named Amora. Please consider it." He signed it, "A friend of the community." He told nobody. He went to work on his bus and spent the day collecting fares and watching Thornfield go by through the dusty window. What happened next, Ethan did not expect. 4 days later, he saw Amara at the market, and something was different about her. She was moving differently, lighter, somehow. He watched her from a distance as she bought tomatoes and talked to the seller with something that looked almost like energy, almost like excitement. Then she turned and walked in his direction, and when she saw him she stopped. "Eddie," she said. It was the first time she had used his name. "Something good happened. Something really good." And she told him that Mr. Fashola had called her and said a revised proposal had been submitted on her behalf and it was very strong and she was being invited for a proper meeting. She had no idea who had submitted it. She was confused, but she was so happy that the confusion did not seem to matter right now. "I think God sent someone to help me," she said, with a sincerity that was so simple and so complete that Ethan felt it land somewhere directly in the center of his chest. He said, "Maybe someone just saw that you deserved a chance." She looked at him with those large quiet eyes and said, "Do you really believe people like that exist?" Ethan looked back at her and said, "Yes. I know they do." And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he was not performing. He was just telling the truth. The announcement came on a Friday. A large printed notice was pasted on the wall of the community hall, on the gate of the primary school, and on 3 market stalls by midday, and within 2 hours, it was all Thornfield was talking about. The Carter Transit Group, which owned the Route 7 bus and several other transport lines serving the region, was hosting a community appreciation gala at the Grand Crestdale Hotel in the next town. The event would celebrate 5 years of service in the region. Local community members were invited. And at the bottom of the notice, in bold letters that people read 3 times to make sure they were not imagining it, the founder and owner of Carter Transit Group, Mr. Ethan Carter, would be personally present at this event. Thornfield lost its mind. Mrs. Bridget abandoned 3 customers at her fabric stall to discuss this development with Agnes. The young men under the mango tree debated what a billionaire would actually look like in person and whether he would arrive by helicopter. Tina from the provision store immediately began planning what she would wear, even though she had not yet confirmed how to get an invitation. And Vanessa reacted in the way that only Vanessa could. She went home, sat her mother down, and said, "Mama, this is it. This is my moment." Mrs. Hartwell looked at her daughter with the pride of a woman who has always believed her child deserves the very best and has never once questioned whether the child has done anything to earn it. "Ethan Carter," Vanessa said, her eyes bright and sharp. "Young, rich, and single. And he is going to be right there in that hotel. All I have to do is make sure he notices me." Mrs. Hartwell immediately agreed that this was an excellent plan and they should go shopping for a new dress. Meanwhile, Ethan continued doing his job. He collected fares. He called out stops. He helped an old woman with a heavy bag onto the bus. He wiped the window smudge that Vanessa complained about, again, on the Friday bus. He watched the village buzzing with excitement about an event that was, in a way that nobody around him could possibly suspect, entirely his own event. It was strange. He had planned this revelation from the beginning. He had always known there would be a moment of exposure. But now that the moment was approaching, he felt something more complicated than triumph. He felt nervous. Not because of the crowd or the speech or the publicity. He felt nervous because of one specific conversation he knew he was going to have very soon, with one specific person, that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with something much more frightening than business. He waited until the evening, when the bus had finished its last run and he was walking back through the village and the road was quiet. He found Amara sitting outside the Hartwell house on the small wooden step, shelling groundnuts into a bowl. She looked up when she heard his footsteps and said, "Eddie. Late walk." He sat down on the low wall nearby. "Did you see the notice?" he asked. She nodded. "The gala?" "Yes." She went back to shelling groundnuts. "Are you not excited?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. Vanessa is already picking an outfit, she said. Mama Hartwell is talking about introducing her to the owner personally. She said it without bitterness. Just quietly, as a fact. And you? Ethan asked. She looked at him. Me, she said, as if the question was slightly surprising. I was not planning to go. It is not really for people like me. Ethan was quiet for a long time after she said that. The groundnuts made a small sound as she dropped them into the bowl one by one. Finally he said, Amora. Come to the gala. She laughed softly. Eddie, I do not have, come to the gala, he said again. Not commanding. Just certain. She looked at him for a long moment with those quiet eyes that noticed more than she ever said. She did not know why, but something in his voice made her feel, for a strange instant, that he was about to tell her something enormous. But he just looked back at her steadily and said nothing more. She dropped another groundnut in the bowl. All right, she said finally. I will come. Neither of them spoke about why this felt like a promise. The night before the gala, Ethan made 3 phone calls. The first was to his head of security, arranging details for the following day. The second was to his event coordinator, confirming the program sequence and a specific addition he had requested that was not on the original agenda. The third was to his mother. Victoria answered immediately, which told him she was not sleeping, which told him she was nervous too. Tomorrow, he said. Yes, she said. Are you ready? He thought about it honestly. I think so, he said. What about you? She laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that has tears somewhere behind it. I am ready, she said. I have been ready since I watched that girl give a stranger a cup of water without being asked. There was a pause. Then Victoria said, Ethan. However this goes tomorrow. Whatever people say or do. You came here and you found what you were looking for. That is already enough. Ethan held the phone and looked at the small ceiling of his rented room at Mr. Aid's house, the cracked plaster, the single bulb, the thin curtain over the tiny window. He thought about his penthouse. He thought about Diana's text message. He thought about Amara saying it is not really for people like me. Yes, he said quietly. I found it. He hung up. He sat in the dark for a while. Then he opened his bag and took out the suit he had hidden there since the first day he arrived in Thornfield, folded carefully at the very bottom, waiting. The Grand Cresdale Hotel was 40 minutes from Thornfield and it was the biggest building most of the village residents had ever entered. People arrived in their best clothes. Mrs. Bridget wore a yellow lace that she saved for funerals and special occasions. Tina wore a red dress she had clearly bought for tonight specifically. Vanessa arrived in a midnight blue gown that fitted her perfectly and she had spent 4 hours on her hair and makeup and she was, objectively, the most striking woman in the room. She walked in with Mrs. Hartwell on one side and an expression on her face that said she was here to win something. She scanned the room quickly. He is not here yet, she told her mother. We need to position ourselves near the front. Mrs. Hartwell agreed. They moved forward. Amara arrived 20 minutes later, quietly, wearing a simple cream dress that she had ironed 3 times to make it look as good as possible. It was the nicest thing she owned. She stood near the back of the room and looked around at the decorations and the lights and the crowd of people speaking loudly and felt slightly out of place, which was a feeling she was very used to. She did not see Eddie anywhere. She did not know why she was looking for him. The event organizer's voice came over the microphone, welcoming everyone and asking them to find their seats. Music played. Waiters moved through the crowd with drinks. The lights dimmed slightly. The voice on the microphone said, Ladies and gentlemen, the Carter Transit Group thanks this community for 5 years of trust and partnership. It is now our great honor to introduce our founder and CEO, Mr. Ethan Carter. The main doors at the far end of the room opened. And the man who walked in was not anyone most of Thornfield recognized. He was tall. He was dressed in a dark suit that fit him the way expensive suits fit people who have worn them all their lives. He had the easy posture of someone who was completely comfortable being looked at. Security walked beside him. His watch caught the light. And then, slowly, as he walked toward the stage, the recognition began to travel through the room. First one person. Then another. Then another. A whisper. Then a gasp. Then the whisper became a wave. Because the face of the billionaire CEO of Qatar Transit Group was a face that every single person in Thornfield had seen before. It was the face of the poor conductor. It was Eddie. The room did not go silent all at once. It went silent in pieces, table by table, conversation by conversation, as recognition spread like a slow fire from one face to the next. Mrs. Bridget's mouth opened and did not close. Agnes grabbed her arm without looking at her. Tina's red dress seemed suddenly very bright and very wrong. And Vanessa stood completely still at her table near the front of the room, and the expression on her face passed through several stages very quickly: confusion, then disbelief, then a particular kind of horror that comes from suddenly seeing every unkind thing you have ever done replayed in your mind simultaneously. Ethan walked to the stage without hurrying. He stood at the microphone. He looked out at the crowd for a moment before he spoke, and his eyes were calm, not cold, not triumphant, just calm, the way people are calm when they have thought carefully about something for a long time and have made peace with what they are about to do. "Good evening," he said. His voice was clear and warm, and it filled the room easily. "I want to start with a thank you. Not the usual kind. I want to thank this community for teaching me something that no boardroom and no business school ever could." He paused. 6 weeks ago, I arrived in Thornfield as a man named Eddie Cole. I wore cheap clothes. I worked as a conductor on the Route 7 bus. Nobody knew who I was. And I washed. Very carefully. I watched how people treat strangers. I watched how people treat those they consider beneath them. And I want to share some of what I saw. The room was absolutely silent. Not even a cough. He spoke for 10 minutes. He spoke about Mrs. Bridget and the story she told about a man she had never spoken to. He spoke, carefully and without cruelty but also without softness, about the difference in how he was greeted when people thought he was poor versus how the room had reacted when he walked in tonight. He spoke about what it feels like to be invisible, to be dismissed, to have your humanity treated as conditional on your bank balance. Several people in the room looked at the floor. Then he said, "But I also saw something else." He paused again, longer this time. "I saw a young woman give a cup of water to an old woman she did not know, without being asked and without expecting anything in return. I saw that same young woman share her lunch with a bus driver who had forgotten his food. I saw her greet an old blind man every single morning with a smile that was real, not because she had to, but because that is simply who she is." He stepped back from the microphone. He looked at a section of the crowd near the middle of the room. "Amora," he said. "Will you stand up, please?" She stood. Slowly. Her face was very still, the way faces go still when a person is trying to manage something large and unexpected. Around her, people turned to look. She straightened her cream dress and lifted her chin slightly, not in pride but in the quiet dignity of a person who has spent years enduring things and has learned to stand very straight under pressure. Ethan looked at her across the room for a moment. Then he said, "This woman treated me with more genuine kindness in 6 weeks than most people show to others in a lifetime. She never once judged me by my clothes or my job. She helped me. She spoke to me like a human being. And she had no reason to, as far as she knew, I had nothing to offer her." He stepped out from behind the podium and walked toward the edge of the stage. Then he said, "Mama." And from the side of the room, from a chair near the wall where she had been sitting as a quiet old woman for the past hour, Victoria Carter stood up, and she removed her headscarf, and she straightened her posture, and she became, before the eyes of the stunned room, exactly who she was, a dignified, elegant woman who had been sitting in their midst the whole time, unnoticed and mostly ignored and, in one case, helped without hesitation by a girl named Amara. Gasps came from every direction. Victoria walked to the stage. Vanessa made a sound that was not quite a word. Mrs. Hartwell reached for her daughter's arm. Victoria stood beside her son and faced the room. When she spoke, her voice was steady but her eyes were bright. "I came to this village as a poor old woman," she said. "I sat near the borehole with tired feet. One person brought me water. One person asked if I needed help. One person saw me as if I actually mattered." She looked out at the room and then directly at Amora. And it was the same person every single time. Then Ethan spoke again. He spoke about Vanessa specifically, and he was fair but he was honest. He described the coin drop. He described the window smudge complaint. He described the way she had spoken to him on the bus with the full enjoyment of someone performing their superiority for an audience. He did not shout. He did not humiliate. He simply described what he had seen, calmly and clearly, the way you state facts. And somehow that was worse than shouting would have been. Vanessa sat with her hands in her lap and could not look up. Mrs. Hartwell had gone a color that did not have a name. Around them, the table was very quiet. Then Ethan walked off the stage entirely. He walked through the crowd, which parted for him in that instinctive way that crowds part for people who are certain of where they are going. He walked to where Amara was standing, still standing, because she had not sat back down, and he stopped in front of her. The whole room washed. Amara looked at him with those large, quiet eyes, and he could see the confusion and the emotion and the thousand questions in them, and he knew there was no elegant way to do this, no speech that would cover everything, so he simply said, quietly and directly, "I am sorry I could not tell you sooner. And I want to ask you something. Properly. When all of this is over tonight and everyone has gone home, will you give me the chance to introduce myself? Not as Ethan Carter. Not as Eddie Cole. Just as a man who has been watching you be the best person in the room for 6 weeks." Amora looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were very bright. Then she said, very softly, "You could have just asked my name at the bus stop." And Ethan laughed, a real laugh, the kind he had not heard from himself in years, and the room, which had been breathless, seemed to exhale as one. What happened afterward came quickly and completely and with the thoroughness that karma seems to prefer. Mr. Fashola's community program approved Amora's business proposal in full. Ethan's company offered to support 3 local catering businesses in the region, and Amora's was at the top of the list. Mrs. Hartwell sent a long message of apology that was clearly written very carefully over several hours and was too formal to be entirely genuine, but was a beginning. Vanessa called twice, and when Amora answered, Vanessa cried, real tears this time, the kind that do not perform well and therefore tend to be true, and said she was sorry and that she had known for a long time that she was wrong and had not known how to stop. Amora listened to all of it. She did not explode. She did not celebrate their suffering. She simply said, "I forgive you. Take care of yourself." And she meant it. Because that was who she was. That was always who she had been. The village of Thornfield talked about that night for years. They talked about the conductor who owned everything. They talked about the old woman by the borehole. They talked about the girl in the cream dress who stood up straight in a room full of people looking at her and did not flinch. And they talked about what it had cost some of them, a coin drop here, a turn back there, a loud dismissal at a bus stop, to learn the oldest lesson in the world, that how you treat people when you think they cannot do anything for you is the truest thing about you. Ethan and Amora took a long time. They were careful with each other. He explained everything, all of it, from Diana's text message to the plan to the 6 weeks on the bus. She asked good questions. She did not pretend it was simple. She had her own things to figure out, the catering business, her own room, her own life that was finally beginning to belong to her. But they called each other in the evenings. They talked for long hours. Victoria, who had returned to her real life, asked about Amora in every conversation with her son without directly asking about Amora, which was her way of doing things and which Ethan had learned to translate long ago. On a quiet afternoon some months later, when the catering business had its first proper market day and every pot sold out before noon, Ethan arrived unannounced to help wash the dishes. He wore an old shirt. He did not tell anyone who he was. He just washed dishes and handed Amara clean pots, and they laughed about something she said that was not even that funny, and the cook who was helping them looked between them and decided without being told that whatever this was, it was real. And that was the beginning of everything good. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe, like, and share it with someone who needs this lesson today. Remember, true character is revealed by how we treat people when we believe they have nothing to offer us. See you in the next emotional story.